Hello everyone, it is so good to see you here on the 4th of March. Can you believe that it is March? We're already in the third month of the year. Where has the year gone already? I have no idea, but here we are. It is so good to spend another Monday with you here at the Voice Essentials Live Hangout. And today, really, I'm going to dedicate the whole video, the whole Hangout, to you guys for question and answers. We haven't done a dedicated Q&A for 2019 yet, so I thought it was high time we did that, given that we're already in March. So I hope you'll be able to throw your questions into the chat, which is opposite, Daniel, that way. Whoop, hang on, there we go. And make sure you leave your live questions there. If you're watching this video as a replay, then you too are welcome, and you can leave your questions in the comments section below of the video, and I always do my best to answer those to the best of my ability. I'm always very open about the fact that I am no guru, I am not omnipotent, I don't know everything, but I do have a developed body of knowledge that we try to work off as a part of these live shows, and occasionally, if I need to, some of your questions occasionally will stump me, and it will give us good fodder for perhaps new pre-record videos that we do in the future. And of course, we do those pre-record videos on quite a regular basis. In fact, I have a new pre-record video that is going live this Wednesday. Many of you would be interested in the idea of breath management. If you're not, then why aren't you? Breath is fundamental to great singing. More importantly, good breath management is fundamental to good singing. And so make sure you watch this Wednesday's new video where we talk about appoggio and accent breath, accent method. So you're going to have to watch the video to learn more, and I'm hoping that you'll get some good education out of it. But of course, as I said, today we're going to dive into reading your questions. I can see already so many people in the live chat, and one thing I did notice was Darvis it's crazy that you are up at 3:30 in the morning, 3:30 a.m. in Liberia. So good to have you join us. All of our regulars, Yahui and John, and I'm looking down here, Linda, of course. Hi, Linda. Linda and I will have a private lesson later on in this week. And Linda, of course, is one of our moderators. She will be collating your questions so that we can systematically go through them. And so I'm looking forward to answering those. Hey, make sure that... I'm just seeing here, yes, Dr. Dan, this is my birth month. This is Darvis. And Yahui is saying, happy birthday, Jarvis. Well, I join Yahui in wishing you a happy birthday, Jarvis. For March, I recommend that you don't reveal what your birth date is here on the channel, but certainly do that. Good to have Prince and Jamie and Azil, all of our regulars. I'm noticing Matt's not with us today. Matt's usually the very first person that is hanging out. So Matt, wherever you are, you're being missed. We hope you're okay. Tortilla Miracle, Shelley, hello from Portland, in USA. Good to have you hanging out with us. Hey, if you're watching the show live, let us know in the chat section, where are you from? What is the weather like? Well, what the time is in your part of the world, and what is the weather like? Here in Brisbane, Australia, it is 2 p.m. This is the time that we always hang out on a Monday, 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. The weather, thankfully, is getting a little bit cooler here. We're still 30 degrees or something, but we've had a really hot summer here in Australia, and so it is good to finally get ourselves into autumn where hopefully we'll start to cool off. You might have noticed my finger. I shared last week while we had Justin join us. Hey, wasn't that a great collaboration? You know, most of the people that we do our guest live hangouts with are not YouTubers, but it was so cool to have Justin Stoney from New York Vocal Coaching join us last week, and I know he had a really fun time, and we are looking to do some further collaborations in the future. Stay tuned. But he wasn't he so gracious, and this is why I think we really resonate on very similar channels of heart, mind, and soul. He's really approaching this voice thing from a very similar space to myself. So if you're not already subscribed to his channel, make sure you do. Hey, next week, I'll come back to the finger. You can't see it in the dark there, can you? Yes, because it's my pirate finger. We'll come back to that. Next week, we've got Dr. Trinice. You got to tune in for this next guest. Trinice is one of the world's leading academic experts, both not just academically but practically as well, around the area of gospel and soul. She is a legend. I hope you'll tune in. She's going to be going to give us even if you don't sing gospel and soul, she is going to give us so many practical tips, I'm sure, around singing, and so I hope you'll tune in. Then, back to my finger, which you still can't see. I'll come over here. I can't. If only it was on that finger. I shared with you last week during the live hangout that I dislocated my finger, and that I'd found out that it in fact was broken in two places at the two joints, which apparently is very, very typical of a dislocation. You generally, if you're going to dislocate your finger, you'll often break it as well. So mine was broken in two places, and so I've now got to have it in this sort of really cool space age splint for 3 weeks, and I did actually play. I don't think my occupational therapist for my finger would be too pleased to know that I actually played guitar last night with it while I led my church in worship, and it was a bit sore, to be honest. I got to the end and it was a bit sore, and I was running the gauntlet a little bit on it, but it's okay. We survived. It didn't dislocate again, and so there you go. Just in case you wondered what the black thing was, my finger is not gangrene, everyone. It's fine. Let's get into some questions. I know you don't want to be listening to about my whinging about all that. Let's jump into the questions today, and we are going to come back to some Q&A. I'm really looking forward to engaging with your questions right after this. Okay, so I wonder if that's the best screen for me to be on. It may well be. If I do... Oh, hang on a second. I've got to come over to the questions. Oh, no, that's good. That will work. Let's go here. I just want to have your live chat up because I kind of want to interact with the live chat a bit today. Linda and I were talking earlier over the weekend whether we go old school and just interact with the chat, which I really love doing. Occasionally it's good to just... for me to be able to participate in the live chat, and because I always feel like sometimes with the Q&A, when I'm looking at the questions written down over here on a different screen, that I don't get to be as... Anyway, Usher has asked, what should we do to get a pleasant voice? He asks, please help me to change the shivering in the voice. The shivering is interesting, the word shivering, and that word, I guess, can mean many things to many people. Let me tell you how I interpret it, Usher, and I hope this is okay. When we hear shivering, that suggests to me instability. Now, that may not be what you mean, but that's how I'm going to answer it, okay? If you're hearing instability in your tone, in your voice, typically the first place that we would go to would be tension management, and by virtue of good breath management. You're going to love this Wednesday's pre-record video because we kind of talk about this in some way. But you would want to look at your breath management, and be mindful of the way your air is flowing through your larynx, ensuring that your larynx is not the primary point of valving or of monitoring or managing the air, that we are always looking to orientate our management of air to the abdominals and through the obliques, and that the larynx, because the larynx, we want the larynx to be free the vocal folds are housed within your larynx, and we want them to be free of tension so that they can oscillate freely in accordance with the type of sounds that you are wanting to create, which are then obviously fully formed through the vocal tract. And so when it comes to getting a pleasant voice, well, firstly, let's be really clear. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. In fact, I wrote a script last week for a new pre-record video that will come out, I think, sometime in May. Yeah, that's how far ahead we've got to be with this whole YouTube thing. And beauty is in the ear of the beholder. And this is where we've got to be really careful here, because the idealism of pleasant is very subjective. It's kind of, well, what is pleasant to one person may not be pleasant to another. And I've had a number of students over the years, for example, who have a vibrato that almost some may feel that it verges on a sense of tremolo, which even when we've worked on their breath management and there's no sense of tension, that tremolo within the voice, it's probably not a tremolo, it is more vibrato, but it's a quick vibrato. They get concerned that is that okay? Yeah, it's fine. And we're now, don't we hear quite regularly, in the top 40 on our radio stations or on Spotify playlists, there's a lot of contemporary artists who have this sort of quick vibrato in their sound. They're using it as a signature. Always remember, there's, zone in on what is unique about your voice. And yeah, look, there may be some people, and I know for one student I'm thinking of, she had been told in her youth that sound was wrong. Well, actually, no, it's not wrong. It's not advantageous if it is compromising your vocal health. If it's not sustainable, then yeah, it may well be problematic. But there is no such thing as a wrong aesthetic. Aesthetics are subjective, and you have to be really mindful of this, because you are not going to please all the people all the time. There are going to be people who don't like the sound of your voice. And no matter how good you become, they never will like the sound of your voice. That is personal preference. Beauty is in the ear of the beholder. Your job is to develop your voice to the best of your ability and seek out that sort of, so that you're satisfied with your own sound. I still remember, let me tell you this quick story. One of my best mates, actually probably my best mate, in fact he is my best mate. We went through high school together. His name is Matt, and hi Matt, if you're watching. He won't be watching. I still remember we were in grade 11, and I was singing for school. He's got I've always thought Matt's got a great voice. He's got a baritone voice. And I still remember Matt. This is like 20 plus years ago. I still remember, and the reason I remember this is because it stung. He said, "I don't like your voice." Dude, you're one of my best mates. Where are you getting off? And he had given me this really honest appraisal of what he thought of my voice. And so you go, well, okay. Now, he has actually since shared with me, because I've shared this story with him a number of years back, and he has since shared that his perception, his view of my voice has since changed, and he actually quite likes it now. So I would dare say there's some change I've developed as a singer, and perhaps his tastes around singing have changed as he has matured. but or just, remember, you can't please all the people all the time. Darvis is asking, hi Dr. Dan, I often find my voice goes out of control when I want to sing higher. What am I doing wrong? And look, Darvis, this again comes back to, for a different reason, but it comes back to tension management. It comes back to breath management. It also does come back to your resonance management. Almost certainly you would find that the vowel shapes that you are arriving on with the voice at that point are having an impact on how your voice feels when you reach those high notes. And this is an illustration I've shared many times. In relationship to high notes, we've often got to remind ourselves that it's not purely that singular moment, that singular dot on the music, that high point that is going to be something that you've got to work on. We've really got to also account for the penultimate notes, the lead up to the notes. And the illustration I think I've used on the channel here many times before, and I've actually got a whole video where I talk about this particular illustration, is that of a pole vaulter. And Olympic pole vaulters often will tell you that they're cognizant, they're aware of whether it's going to be a good jump, whether it's going to be a jump where they successfully get over that high beam, not as they go over the apex of the jump, but in the lead up, in the run up, and in the leap as the pole jags into the ground, in that pole point. I don't know what it's called. We're going to call it a pole point. It's not going to have been called a pole point. But anyway, they know before the apex point. And it's the same with our singing. It's the penultimate notes. It's the lead up notes that you've often got to account for prior to actually even worrying about the top note. If you can get those lead-up notes right, in fact, I was working on a song with a student of mine last Friday, and we were, the song we were working on was a music theatre piece, and the song, the composer had been wonderful enough to give us these points that we're able to prep even the vowel shape in preparation for the top note, and we were able to orientate those penultimate moments, and once we got those penultimate moments in place, boom, we could get the note. And so we didn't fixate on the top note, we fixated on that run up, and so look at your penultimate points, make sure your shapes and your breath flow, don't push. Yeah, if you drive that voice into place, getting to that top note is almost certainly destined to fail. So be mindful of that. Yahui is asking, I know that you hear your own voice differently. You do, Yahui. You hear it differently than other people hear it. Is it normal to hear it lower than it is? How do you learn to recognize true pitch? Interesting that you asked this question today, Yahui, because I've actually had a couple of people on one of my videos over the weekend aggressively, I must add, asking, how do you even know you're singing the right note? And look, sometimes, just on that point, sometimes there is no way to avoid the fact that you need to be in a physical locality with a qualified singing teacher, an experienced singer who can reflect back to you when you are getting the note right. And this is where private singing lessons can be so helpful. If you are at that point where you're struggling to match pitch and you're really conscious of that, or you've been told that you are, really your way forward is to be in the room with another human being. You can try using programs like Sing and See that you can download, and I know there are some apps, and that can be helpful. But they're only often going to tell you that you are getting the pitch. What you want to know is how you're getting the pitch, and making sure you're not setting up incorrect tensions and those sorts of things. That's the side note. Back to Hui's sort of central question. It's interesting. We do hear ourselves uniquely to every other human being on the planet, because we don't just hear ourselves externally to our own ears. We hear ourselves by virtue of bone conduction, internal resonance, little bits up through our eustachian tube. There's a little tube that runs from our nasopharynx up into our middle ear, which we use to unblock our ears when we're going up in plains or up a mountain. And so we do hear ourselves very uniquely. Another reason why having an external source, such as a singing teacher, is such a powerful thing, because they can reflect back to you. They can give you honest feedback about what an audience might hear, and that then we're able to bring those two worlds, what you hear uniquely and what everyone else hears, bring them closer together. They will never be one and the same, but you can bring them to the point where there's a virtual, almost a reduction to the point of it being a moot point in the difference. Now, whether we're hearing ourselves lower may be, so we can either hear ourselves tonally lower, so maybe the resonance is sounding darker. So that could be one way I respond to your question, Yuhui. The second way we could respond to your question would be around actual pitch, and it's not an unusual thing when I'm working with people who do, when they're first starting out and they do struggle with pitch. It is not an unusual thing for me to need to work with them on where I see this more so in guys than I do in girls, where I will, to get them to sing a particular pitch, I'll often have to sing an octave above that to drag their voice up onto the actual pitch that I want them to sing. And so it's an interesting phenomenon, and it wasn't something I really got onto until I was sort of 10 years into my teaching career, where I sort of discovered this little phenomenon, and so I'll sing an octave higher. It drags the voice up onto the actual pitch that I want them singing on, and we're able to then go on from there. I don't know whether that's where your question's going, Yuhui, but hopefully that's helpful. Sat Yam, how much time to learn singing? I think the question would be interpreted, how much time does it take to learn to sing? Good question, Sat Yam. Can I say, my first response every time I'm asked this question, because Sat Yam, I'm asked this question a lot. The first response is, how long is a piece of string? I think that's Australian colloquialism for saying there is no dedicated time frame, because everyone is different. What I don't subscribe to is taking shortcuts. I don't know how many of you have watched the movie The Matrix, and there's a point in that movie, Keanu Reeves, where he's come out of the Matrix for the first time, and they're starting to teach him and train him. And one of the other characters is pulling out all the training programs, and they're sort of in cartridge kind of things. And he goes, well, if you're as good as they say you are, then you don't need this, you don't need that, you don't need this. Let's just go to the hard stuff. Do you know what? I actually don't subscribe to that approach. I know some singing teachers will do that. And the reason I don't is because even with those singers who step into my studio and I'm able to recognize, hey, this is a person that appears to have some natural inclinations to good singing, I still want to make sure that their foundation is solid. And so I take everyone along a not dissimilar pathway in my lessons, because technically I want to make sure that we're building on a really, really solid, really firm foundation. And so that's how I go about it. And so it generally, if in taking that into account, if someone says, look, I need to know, you know, how long is it going to take me to get this technique thing going? Do you know what? I reckon it takes around about 18 months to 2 years to build a really solid, and I'm talking, that's a weekly singing lesson. Around about 18 months to 2 years to build a really solid technique, a fundamental, basic technique. You could be developing technique for the rest of your life. So I'm not saying that you've 2 years and you've got it all down, but it does take time. Now, I have observed it happen a little quicker than that. Equally, I've definitely observed it take much longer than that. But on average, that's about where I reckon it sits. Now, I know that some of you watching this video will be going, 18 months to 2 years? You might even be thinking to yourself, yeah, sure, Dr. Dan, whatever it takes to keep people coming into your studio and spending money. Look, I wish it was quicker. I really do. But what I've observed is when you take shortcuts with the voice, it has a predisposition to doing things in a less than efficient manner that then set up, scenarios where the voice is less sustainable. Can I be really clear? I'm being very general in my comments here. Look, if you are an exception to the rule, fabulous. But I always orientate people to the rule before we acknowledge the exception. And so that's how long I think it generally takes to learn singing from the point of view of being having a solid foundational technique, Satyan. Coming over here, wow, look at your questions. We are almost certainly not going to get through all of these, everyone. Wow. Okay, Violet Star. I just saw Karen's in the house. Hey, Karen. Nice to see you. Violet Star is asking, hey, Dr. Dan, your videos have helped me so much. I was wondering what you would advise someone to do to reduce vocal fry. Vocal fry, it does depend kind of on what you're talking about vocal fry. If we're talking purely about vocal fry at onset, then I've got a great, I've got videos about all of this, Violet. But if you're talking about just onset, in Voice Essentials 2, the exercise collection Voice Essentials 2, I do have an onset and offset exercise that you might want to have a look at and download and start working on, because there is a way to develop simultaneous onset and to clean that up. I often use a y, so throughout Voice Essentials 1, I'm always instructing the commencement of phonation with a y, yeah, so we get a clean onset, as opposed to yeah, and so that's one way we can talk about vocal fry. If, however, you mean vocal fry as a phonatory practice where it continues through the phrase, then that's more likely to be a vocal adduction issue. And there are exercises. In fact, I've got a good video, one of my more recent videos actually. If you jump across onto the channel, have a look at the videos tab and go looking for how to close there's one called how to close the phonatory gap, and I think the other one's called how to stop breathy singing, or anyway, jump in and have a look. It's all about getting more balanced closure to the vocal folds so that they oscillate in a more balanced manner. Can I just highlight, that is not because I'm suggesting vocal fry is a bad thing from an aesthetic value. As contemporary vocalists, we want to be able to add some vocal fry in for effect at times, but I always orientate singers as a rule, as a habit, to clean, balanced phonatory habits that you then make aesthetic choices on top of. So, you know, if your voice is always giving a vocal fry sound, then that is going to wear and tear at the voice if that is the habit. So we want to get away from that and then make the choice for voice. Okay, Phil Benjamin. Hi Dan, I have a question for you. I recently did some vocal recording and one of the issues I encountered is my voice is very wavery. How can I work to correct this? Thanks. I would send you back, Phil, to maybe the question I gave to Usher right way back at the beginning when we talked about shivering, and I would probably want to then ask a follow-up question, Phil, about that. Is that wavering coming in later in your session, in your recording session, or was it there from the very beginning? If it's there in the very beginning and then it disappears, then it may simply be a vocal warm-up thing. If it's there at the end, then I would dare say that's a vocal fatigue thing. If it's there all the way through, then it's a general balance thing. As far as correcting it, I would, you've got to go to your breath. This is why breath management is so important. I know that there are singing teachers, and I'm going to be, as I always try to be, really respectful in how I say this. There are singing teachers who don't advocate for breath management being an important aspect of good voice. That you don't have to worry about your breathing. I humbly and respectfully disagree. I think, yes, it would be wonderful if we all just naturally breathed well for singing. My observation over 20 plus years of teaching is more often than not, we don't. More often than not, we do need to learn skills around managing the breath stream, especially for contemporary voice, because what our bodies want to do is load the voice from underneath the larynx, and as a result the larynx braces against that and it causes constriction and a whole range of issues. And so breath, in my opinion, is so important, which is why I dedicate exercises to the development of good breath, and why I work so hard on it with my students. And can I say that my students, by and large, all then sing the praises of good breath management. When they start to really get that going, their voice definitely benefits from that. Oh, Matt, I'm taking it. Is that our normal Matt? Because you weren't there earlier, Matt. If I hypothetically audition for a role in Phantom of the Opera, would they automatically turn me down because I'm a bass, or would they give me a chance in case they like it? Matt, with music theatre, the unfortunate thing is it is unlikely that a bass would be cast in the role of the Phantom for Phantom of the Opera, purely because they are going to be, it would be very strange. Well, that's the wrong use of term. They would be, it would be unlikely that they would change the key. Music theatre, in contemporary vocals, I've got a video on this where we talk about tuning the key, changing the key and all that sort of stuff. That's done practice in contemporary vocals, especially in jazz. In music theatre, they are always very reluctant to do that. It does occasionally happen, even in the professional world, but it is the exception, not the rule. And so, especially in your, and one of the reasons I think for that, Matt, is because if you're in a music theatre and if it's being accompanied by a live band, an orchestra or an ensemble, you don't just have to change the vocal, you don't just have to change the piano, you've got to actually change everyone. And not all of your instruments in the pit are going to be able to just, play it in a different key. And so, it's then unlikely that a bass vocal is going to be able to sing the notes of the Phantom as successfully as perhaps the music director and the theatric director would want. So certainly, Matt, do not take it personally that you wouldn't get into that role. It's likely to purely be just very normal, everyday logistics of what that would take to do. Tika, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, Tika Fender. Any tips on avoiding strain when singing high notes? I'm a soprano and just started singing but have a hard time raising my soft palate. So the soft palate, oh dearie me, I had someone actually just before we had, the funny thing was, just before we had Justin on the show last week, I actually had someone tell me I needed to listen to Justin and Tristan Paredes, I think that's how you pronounce his last name, that I should learn from them about this subject of soft palate. And again, my reply to that was I respectfully believe that my observation is that there is benefit in us becoming more cognizant and more aware of the soft palate position, that we can learn to have a lift there, that we do need to, in keeping with that, keep the tongue forward. Often it's associated with the widening of the pharyngeal wall. And so learning to do that, I'm not going to gild the lily. It takes time. Hearkening back to the comment I just made earlier about, how long does it take to learn to sing? Well, it takes a couple of years to get these sort of foundational techniques going. But the reason we want to, work on the shape and the space of the back of our throat is because it benefits tone. It benefits resonance, and the soft palate is a part of that. To your first question, Tika, any tips on avoiding straining when singing high notes? Yeah, there is, and I talked about it earlier. Can you go back and watch earlier in the show where we talked about that? Just because I've got, the questions here, they just keep coming. So can you go back and watch where he talked about the penultimate notes? Have a listen to that answer. Sean Bowen, I can get into mixed voice using the sliding method, but it is difficult to find individual notes. It ends up either push chest voice or head voice. Any advice, please? Look, remember that mixed is not, firstly, mixed is not a registration. It is a balancing of registration. So, for example, in the really modern, vernacular of M1, M2, or where I still find myself describing it as shorten a dominant, lengthen a dominant, where we've got this tug of war between the musculature. It's where we get a really nice balance. So your chest voice, yeah, your head voice, what some people want to call head voice, yeah, same note, and now with mixed voice, yeah, so you can hear it somewhere in the middle, right? Which is why we call it mixed. I'm still not happy with that. For those of you who have watched my video about mixed voice, I am still not happy with that term, but anywho, here we are. And so mixed voice is the way we can get to mixed is actually to start playing around with in the middle of your voice. I'd go and check out my video on this subject, but you can play just in the middle. Yeah. Now to start with, you might like to approach it just from the point of view of volume. So if you think about loud, soft on a single note in the middle of your general voice, in the middle of your prima voce, your prime voice, so where it feels really comfortable, just play on volume. That play on volume will in some ways help to applicate that sort of sense of heaviness for shortener, for chest voice, really light for head, and then in the middle you can really play on getting that balance right. And once you've got it on that note, move it to another note and play around on there. And then it comes down to sort of just exploring that space. If you haven't watched my video on the subject, I think you'd find there's some helpful tools in there as well. Jamie A, Dr. Dan, would you give voice lessons via Skype or FaceTime or similar technology? Do you find it to be effective enough to continue with lessons? Jamie, I do teach lessons online. I've got students from all over Australia and all over the world, for that matter, that I'm teaching constantly online using exactly the same technologies that we use to hang out together for our live hangouts. I can show you, let's just to break things up a bit, I've got different screens, videos I should say, different video cameras, and we set up and we go all over the shop with our lessons, and I have different cameras set up. So yes, I do teach online lessons. There is a link in the description section of this video where you can go and check out prices and all of that. Are they effective? I wouldn't offer them if they were not. But can I say, there have actually been two people in the period of about 5 or 6 years that I've been teaching online singing lessons, where I've actually had to say to them, hey, look, this is not going to be the best process for you, because the technology still does not allow us, for me to sing along in time with my online student. So in lesson, I'll often be singing along with the student, so they'll be singing yeah, and I'll be singing along with them. In the activity of the online space, because of latency, some of you may know it as lag, where what you're hearing, as I'm talking now, you're all hearing that sort of half a second. Some of you are hearing it with a second delay. And so that lag then puts us out of time when we sing. So when I have a student, and this has happened twice, when I have someone who is still at that point in the development of their voice where they're struggling to track notes correctly and get their pitch going, then online singing lessons are not the right thing for you to be doing. You really do need that human being in a space with you where you can practice your notes. But once you've got that down, online singing lessons work really well. They're never going to be the same as in part the way I've just described it. They're never going to be the same as being in a studio with a human being where they can, be in the space with you. That being said, I am a teacher that has a no touch the student rule. So I don't touch necks, I don't touch, it's partly because of, I just do not, I'm not a hands-on teacher. And that's not to say teachers that are doing anything wrong. They're not. But I'm a guy and I teach a lot of women, and so I just have, ever since I started teaching, no touches at all. And so I find that I'm not hindered by the online lesson, because I never, I'm always getting the students to put hands on their own bodies. I hope I hope that didn't sound creepy. You know where I'm coming from. It's the online singing lesson is a very effective tool if if the teacher is set up to do it well. I think it's less effective if there's only one camera, and if I'm just only sitting here, I do like to be up and in front of my other cameras and doing that. So, Karen's saying I'm hands off too. So there you go. Karen is female teacher, been teaching a long time. I just think in today's liturgist society, it is just not worth the risk for a teacher to hands-on. And you can affect the same things, can't you, Karen, by getting the student to feel their own body and do go about things that way. Guys and gals, we've only got time for a few more questions. Lucas, I just want to appreciate you all for being so engaged in today's live hangout. There are so many questions here. We are not going to get through all of them. Linda, I'll get you to we'll leave this on record, and maybe in 2 weeks' time we can come back to it and continue. We'll try to maybe get to some of these questions. Lucas, a few years ago during a live audition, my throat closed in, almost like a swallowing-like fashion, and cut off my sound. Is there a way to mitigate this in future? Lucas, first of all, I'd want to make sure that the way you're describing suggests that it wasn't a vocal fold hemorrhage. So that would be my first check. The second check would be, look, our muscles do cramp, and they certainly can cramp within the voice. And so you might get that catch where the voice sort of locks up. That may be because of too much pressure. It may be because of fatigue. It might be because you didn't warm up correctly, and so you didn't prepare the voice for use over a long period. Good technique does mitigate these things happening. Good technique is not your guarantee of a life of singing that is void of problems. It is an insurance against it. It certainly helps to lift your water level and to keep your voice buoyant, especially at times of sickness or where the voice feels compromised by virtue of fatigue or what have you. But good technique does not mean that you will suddenly be, free of all challenges vocally. But to mitigate that happening in the future, we would certainly head down the road of technique. I don't think we've ever had a question from our next person, N Hasate. I'm not going to be able to say that correctly. I apologise. I was lucky enough to have a voice that everyone admires, no experience of singing. So if we already have a good deep voice, does this mean that we'll be a good singer? What is the first step? We kind of covered this a bit earlier, didn't we, where we talked about the perception. And it is important that we ensure that here's an interesting angle. It is important that we ensure that our own perception is accurate. And unfortunately, very sadly, the TV talent shows do, and I'm not going to mention them directly, but one particular program I'm thinking of do take advantage of people's incorrect self-perception of where their voice is actually at in their developmental journey, and they take advantage of that and throw them up on the screen, and sadly the populace find themselves pointing the finger and laughing at that person because that person may have not had the opportunity to have someone come alongside them and say, hey, look, you're not quite ready to do that show yet. Let's not have you go down that track yet. I would always add the word yet. Admittedly, as many of you know, I'm not a big fan of TV talent shows, but that's a different story. We're not going to get onto that soapbox right now. We've got to make sure that our self-perception is accurate first. We can then take great encouragement from the perception of others, people who are also feeling like, you've got a good sound. But then don't settle there. A voice that settles there is not dissimilar to the story of Dorothy and Toto traveling along the yellow brick road when they get to that field of poppies, and yellow poppies, I think it was yellow. I think were they yellow? Correct me in the chat section, everyone, if they're not yellow. Where her main goal, the eye on the prize, is to go and deal with the Wicked Witch of the West, was it? But she gets to this beautiful field and it's so lovely and she's tired, and so she just sits down in that space and she just, and in the end she goes to sleep. And it's only by virtue of the help of some of her friends that she's able to be stirred from that point of slumber and to go on with the rest of the journey. I observed that very same sort of thing with talented people, talented singers, what you and I might call gifted singers. It's all too easy to settle for that. And I always think that's a great shame, because it means that that voice is unlikely to actually become what its potential. It's not going to realize its potential while ever it just settles for that. And so be mindful of that. don't settle for just having a good voice. You know, work towards developing towards a great voice. And again, that's going to be subjective, isn't it? I'm going to do one more question, because that's actually all we've got time for. I've got to head off into the rest of the afternoon. And I'm going to give it to Austin Poseidon, because I don't think I've ever answered a question for Austin before. And then Linda, we're going to save these questions for in a couple of weeks' time. And we'll do this again, because obviously there's a lot of activity going on here today. Lack of high notes. This is Austin's question. A lack of high notes is very limiting to what I can do as a musician. What do I do about that? Is my voice still good, useful? Absolutely. We would want to go looking at where is the lack? You know, why is there a lack? Is it because you're not accessing your upper registers up into falsetto as well as we would want you to? Are we, you know, being realistic around your anatomy? What voice type have you been born with? And I heard I've got a video that many of you will have seen. What is my voice type? And it's the one where you can download a worksheet and what have you. And I've had a couple of people, again, aggressively. Why are people so aggressive in their comments on YouTube? I don't know. Can I tell you, when people are aggressive now, I just I read the comment, I try to take it on board, I try to get past the aggressiveness, but it brings a smile to my face, because I think, man, come on, just settle down. This is just singing. Let's not get carried away here. But anyway, where was I before I got sidetracked? Limiting to what can be, blah blah blah. Oh, that thing. Yeah, people have been saying to me, you know, we can't be, you know, limited by putting the voice in a box. My response to those people has been, did you watch the whole video? Because I say that very point at the very end of the video. Watch the whole video, people, please. And so you cannot put your voice in a box. That's very true. But it is helpful, in my humble opinion, it is helpful to know what are the anatomical limits that you have been born with. What are those biological things that you have to learn to be within? You know, I was born with this face. Now, some of you may like this face and some of you may not. I've learnt to live with it. You know, when I look it in the mirror every morning, you know, that sounds like I get up and look in the mirror every morning. I don't. But you get my point. When I'm doing my hair and those sorts of things, you know, I'm content with what I've got. We have to be learnt. I'm not a supermodel, but I've had to learn to be content with what I've been born with. We all have to learn to be content with who we are. We are all fearfully and wonderfully made. You are awesome, just the way you are. And your voice is awesome, just the way it is. Now, the reality of life is you are almost certainly, Austin, if you have not, you know, traveled far on the developmental journey, then you are almost certainly not realizing the full potential of your voice. And that's the beautiful thing about traveling the journey of technique. It's about discovering the full potential of your anatomy. And so certainly we want you to do that. But don't find yourself just settling for going, oh, I'm limited at the top. Well, let's find out whether you actually are, and you know, a great singing teacher is going to help you do that. The other thing that might help, and I haven't mentioned it today because I've mentioned it so much, but I've got a new online course that's about to go live in April. There's still you can still get a 15% discount if you sign up before it goes live in April, and so there's a link in the description section of this video. voiceessentials.com.au is where you'll find it. You might like to have a look at that, and it will take you along the journey of developing your full range and those sorts of things. Check it out in your own time if that's going to be helpful, Austin. I hope it will. Okay, wow. I always get to the end of these and go, man, that is a lot. That is a lot of talking. My voice does always get to the end of this, and it does feel fatigued, I can tell you. I hope you've enjoyed our live hangout today as much as I have. I hope the Q&A that we've had today has been helpful. I hope you can apply it in a really practical way. I hope you are enjoying being a part of our community. I love being a part of this community. I learn from you as much as hopefully you're learning from me, and I love hanging out. We do this every Monday, 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, and I know in your part of the world that it still could be Sunday, but I hope you can join us each and every time. Just like Davos joins us from Liberia at 3:30 a.m. Davos, that's a bit crazy to be honest, but anywho, if you're watching it as a replay, make sure you leave your comments in your questions in the comments section below. Hey, don't forget to hit the thumbs up button if you've enjoyed today's video. Share it far and wide. And don't forget, this week we've got a pre-record video about breath management. Please watch it. I know it's going to be helpful to so many of you. And I really look forward to seeing you in that video, where you'll always hear me end the videos by saying, I'm Dr. Dan,